Russia says it downed hundreds of drones in a Ukrainian attack over its territory, including St. Petersburg. Now, it comes as an economic forum there, drawing thousands of attendees, gets underway. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said long-range strikes hit key targets, including the St. Petersburg oil terminal, one of Russia's largest oil transfer facilities in the northwest. Now, that attack, or these attacks, came a day after Russia launched a deadly, large-scale barrage against Ukraine, killing at least 23 people in the cities of Kyiv and Dnipro. CNN's Claire Sebastian following this story for us, and Paula and I have been just talking about the sort of escalation in Iranian attacks on the Gulf region. We shouldn't sort of underplay the significance of what we have seen in the past 48 hours, both in Ukraine and indeed Ukrainian attacks, of course, on St. Petersburg in Russia. What more can you tell us at this point?
Yeah, Becky, I think it's clear we're seeing an escalation on both sides in terms of aerial attacks in this war, perhaps by virtue of the fact that this is a war where the front line is largely static. This is an area, certainly in terms of Ukraine's defense, where it feels that it can hit military targets across the border into Russia to try and move the needle here. And of course, we see from Russia a slightly different approach with, yes, military targets, but also its efforts to exhaust the Ukrainian population into submission. So I think, look, when we look at the timing of these attacks on St. Petersburg, there isn't much nuance there. This is the first day of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. It used to be a very global event where Russia was able to sort of showcase its economic growth, try to bring in investment. It used to be called the Russian Davos back in the day. That was before, of course, the high number of sanctions made working with Russia a big legal risk for international companies, not, of course, to mention the political risk. But it is still very important to the Kremlin. Putin is set to speak there on Friday. So it is a big banner set piece event. And of course, people are now arriving with these plumes of smoke coming from different parts of St. Petersburg. So that is certainly sending a message. And I think that, look, it wasn't just that. There was an oil terminal that was hit, but there was also a significant moment when the Ukrainian unmanned systems forces say that they hit a Russian warship that was moored at Kronstadt Island, that is in the bay, just flanked by St. Petersburg. We have video, I think, that was released by the unmanned systems forces. You see it there. This is the warship Boyki, it's called. Apparently, according to the Ukrainian side, it is a ship that's been used for operations near NATO borders, escorting vessels of the Russian Federation's Shadow oil fleet. So they are claiming to have hit that in yet more significant messaging about the power and frankly advancement of their drone program there. So this was significant, part of a pattern that we see, as I say, of escalating drone attacks on both sides. Here we have a quote from one unit of the unmanned systems forces, Becky. They say, "We really wanted to send a delegation to the forum in St. Petersburg, but there is a nuance. Our representatives fly only one way." And the response from the Kremlin today, Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, saying our responses will be systemic in nature and using this to justify the continuation of their operations in Ukraine, saying it is to prevent such strikes that the special military operation, as they call their war, continues.
It was only 4 months ago when we were reporting on the sort of revolving doors of diplomacy in Geneva. We had Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner going from one hotel talking Iran to another hotel talking Ukraine and Russia. Some optimism at the beginning of the year that we might avoid a US war with Iran, and certainly there may be a journey towards peace for both Russia and Ukraine. Where do we stand with regard an end to this at this point, Claire? Is it clear?
I think that was one of the biggest issues for Ukraine, the biggest downsides of the US-Israeli war in Iran, is that it caused a significant, if not complete, loss of momentum when it came to that diplomatic process. Now, we have to be realistic. The diplomatic process had not yet yielded anything looking like a compromise from the Russian side, but there was, at least certainly from the Ukrainian perspective, there was that momentum. These talks were continuing. They had started to do sort of talks in a trilateral format involving representatives from Russia and Ukraine. And of course, the US side, and that has now stopped. So we hear from President Zelensky trying to push for this to restart. He gave an interview to Face the Nation, the US Sunday talk show this past weekend, saying he's looking to sort of reinvigorate that process. He understands that the US delegation is potentially considering going back to Moscow, but he wants them to come to Ukraine as well. They have not yet visited Ukraine. This is Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, of course. So the Ukrainian side are trying to reinvigorate that process. We don't have any dates in the diary as of yet, but certainly they are looking to that. And of course, on the European side, there has been some talk of Europe playing a greater role in negotiations between Russia and Ukraine going forward. As yet, no key headlines on that.
Overnight, Ukraine launched various strikes targeting key infrastructure in Russia, including in St. Petersburg. Ukraine has rapidly developed its medium and long-range drones to attack various Russian targets. How sustainable are these efforts?
These efforts are quite sustainable because what the Ukrainians have been able to do is not only create a drone industry that is producing drones and missiles that have that significant of a range, but what they're also doing is they're diversifying their points of supply and their points of manufacturing. So it's very hard for the Russians to target these areas, and it's also something where the Ukrainians, because of that basically diversity of locations, it's very important for the Ukrainians to use these because this is the way that they gain leverage. Neither side is going to really make progress on the ground, say in the Donetsk region, for example, or the Donbas region. But what's going to happen now is that the Russians, of course, are going to respond once again, probably with major attacks against the population centers like Kyiv.
They've been doing it over the past several days, hitting major, areas in the Ukrainian capital, for example, destroying whole buildings, apartment buildings, killing a lot of civilians, including children.
Absolutely. And that this is going to be a significant problem for the Ukrainians because they don't have the air defenses that they need to defend against those missiles and those drones. But what they are doing in responding to the Russians and by in essence, taking the fight to Russia's economy, that really makes a difference. The things that were targeted in the St. Petersburg area were oil installations, and that will have a significant impact on the Russian economy.
Yeah, the Russia-Ukraine war is clearly escalating. Colonel Layton, thank you very, very much.
Sebastian Shukla joins us live now with more on these developments. So, Sebastian, obviously this comes just shortly after Russia actually launched one of its hardest and most difficult sort of offensives in months on the Ukrainian people. Just explain to us where things now stand in terms of the battlefield and who really does have the upper hand here.
Yeah, good afternoon, Zain. I mean, we spoke this time yesterday and we were talking about a large-scale attack that had taken place on the Ukrainian capital city. What we're talking about 24 hours later, Zain, is the inverse here. What we now have is the Ukrainian army launching a major and devastating attack on largely Russia's second city, that northern city of St. Petersburg, where, as you said, in just a couple of days' time, President Putin is going to be addressing the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, a forum that's largely dubbed as Putin's Davos, and of which he will lay out and talk about various Russian economic policies, but will also undoubtedly also touch on the geopolitical implications and particularly about the war, or the special military operation, as Russia calls it, in Ukraine. Zain, I don't think that there is any hiding behind the fact here that this was a very coordinated attack that was designed to send a message, if it had not already been delivered by the Ukrainians, that Kyiv is able to hit Moscow where it hurts. And in the space of just a month, we now have potential security situations surrounding two Russian events, of which President Putin plays a central part in them. On the 9th of May, you'll remember, Zain, that there were threats of a Ukrainian drone attack on Moscow around the Victory Day celebrations parade. And now we have this attack today in the days that this conference opened, or hours that this conference opened, and just before the president speaks himself. President Zelensky, for his part, who is still in Kyiv and has been speaking alongside the NATO Secretary General today, Mark Rutte. We've just had some comments that have come from him, which say that attacks like this, the Russians must know that if they use drones and missiles against us, we will do the same, and it's only a matter of time before we increase the scale of our responses. Zain, we are in almost now a slinging competition as that battlefield stalemate in the Donbass really appears to be almost at a complete and utter standstill. I think that we are in a new phase of this war now, which is seeing these aerial bombardments of key infrastructure targets designed to inflict as much pain both on civilian people but also on economies and militaries in order to slow down productions of weapons, recruitment and replenishments of supplies and money that go into both sides' war machines. And I just think that this now, over the last little period of time that we've been looking at this and analysing these attacks, is the cadence that we're going to continue to see, because the Ukrainians believe, and what Western officials have been telling us and been telling me, is that attacks like these are really hurting Russia and President Putin where it hurts the most, and at the moment that's in his pocket.